Well, welcome. Welcome. This is Pheng, he, him, his with the Men and Masculine Folks Network. Going right into it as we always do. No prep and no nothing for us most of the time these days. So being organic and seeing all of you today and those who are joining us on Facebook at this moment. So grateful to have you, and for those who are joining us later on in the conversation or at any point in the conversation, welcome to all of you as well too. I always appreciate you tuning in and listening to these conversations and hopefully being able to take something away that connects to your life, how you're moving as a man, how you're practicing healthy masculinity and manhood in your own life. This is our 30th, 29th, 30th conversation, I believe, right? I'm seeing some nod from Sean there. 28th or 29th. 30th. Okay, sorry. We're gonna get it right this morning here or this afternoon here. It must be the time changes coming soon here. So 30th kitchen table conversation, and it's been 30 times that we've done this. Again, we do these bi-weekly, so it's about twice a month. And I want to give it off to the folks here as well too. Excited to have most of us back in this space. We haven't been in this kind of configuration for quite some time, a few months now, I should say. So excited to be with all of these siblings and men, masculine identified people here. So I'll give it to them to share before I go on to sort of share what we're gonna all go into today.
I'm Roderic, he, him, in Golden Valley, and recovering from a 99% drop in my Halloween visitors, just so you know.
Hello, everyone. Felix Martinez, he, him, and his, reporting from Eagan, Minnesota. Super happy and excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, Serrano Robinson, he, him, his pronouns. Out of Duluth right now, and just happy to be here as well. So thank you.
And hey, everybody, I'm Sean Hayes, he, him, his pronouns, also in Duluth. And yeah, feeling good, feeling excited to chat, see what comes up today.
Very cool. And as always, Julianna is our person who's supporting us on the back end with those who are chatting. So definitely chat in your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, agreements, disagreements, pushing our boundaries and each other's boundaries, and thinking on the topics that we are engaging in. Definitely either during the conversation or even after the conversation is always welcome as well too. So a couple of things, obviously, right? There's a couple of things that are coming up this month and next month. Obviously, we know that first and foremost, November really is the start of Indigenous Heritage Month. And so it's really important for us to actually recognize Indigenous folks and the amount of sacrifice I think that their communities have made and have been sort of like violently pushed to make without their choosing as well too. And then obviously the holidays are around the corner, and some holidays are starting as well too. So there's a lot of holidays that are coming up as well during the next couple of weeks here into the end of the year. And can't believe 2021 is almost over for some of us already. If we're looking ahead in our work schedules and the way in which we move in our lives, it's over for some folks already, and some folks are already oriented to 2022 already and looking forward to what's happening. So there's a lot of things that I think we can engage and conversate in terms of what it means to be practicing healthy masculinity in in the embeddedness of all of these things, right? Indigenous Heritage Month, and the holidays that are coming out, and the year coming to an end. There's all of this that's actually happening. So I leave it there and see what that comes up for folks and what folks want to share. I do want to share that I think it's really important for us to recognize that up to this point, I think we have, I believe we have not had an Indigenous person on our chat and in these conversations. And so we take full responsibility for that and know that we have been in conversations and are in conversations with Indigenous folks, men folks, masculine folks, and women folks as well to come on and to share their thoughts and input. So we recognize that and we've been in conversation with folks to get them to come on and to join us regularly as well too, in case anybody's wondering and pondering why and how that hasn't happened yet. And so our apologies for that, and we take full responsibility for sure in terms of not moving that needle as much. I think the other part of it is that so many spaces, I think maybe some of us are in these days, people want to make sure that we acknowledge like the connection to the land because of Indigenous folks' connection to land and earth and the land that we are on. I think that that is very important to be able to do those things and then to do like welcomes and things like that. But I think in really honoring Indigenous folks, it means really being able to actually have them at the center as well, too, of our conversations, and have them at the center of what it means to build this country and build communities in their homelands, right? In their spheres and in their spaces where they didn't really have a choice as to whether people should be building or not. And now through colonization and imperialism, we are where we are at, and how do we do those, how do we move out of those contradictions, right? In terms of centering and honoring Indigenous folks and the contributions that they've made to each one of our communities, and whether or not they like and are allowing folks to actually make those contributions, that they have no choice in that. And so I'm just finagling and throwing these things out in terms of like the kinds of contradictions or the kinds of tensions that I am holding, that the network is holding, and that maybe perhaps even in this space that we are all holding together as we struggle in terms of like building solidarity and building community across our cultural divides and our cultural barriers and our cultural ways of being and our ways of being and practicing healthy masculinity across communities and within our own communities as well too.
I'll just hop in here because I don't have an exact like specific way I want to take the conversation, but just like acknowledging that there's a lot here like that we're holding. And I know for me, you know, like I've been sort of like reflecting a lot lately on this like season change that we're coming into too, sort of like just shifting into like a winter, you know, colder insider, I made that up, inside weather oftentimes. And so just doing a lot of reflection around that as we're coming in. And I know one thing I had shared with all of you as we were sort of getting set for this was, you know, like holding the nuances around this time of year being Indigenous Heritage Month, as well as, you know, so many of our friends and families and community members are like celebrating Thanksgiving. And I know that that was just a very recent conversation that my wife and I had briefly, was like, what do we think about that? How do we want to move forward in terms of celebrating a day that, you know, historically has not been talked about or taught about in truthful ways, I'll say. And just, like getting a invite from my mom, like, hey, we're doing this on Thanksgiving, come over. And so it just brings up a lot of questions for us, like, because we're definitely in a time where it's like we have been learning a lot more about the history, about, the people who have been harmed in this country. And so how do we make those decisions going forward? Do we celebrate? Do we show up and eat turkey and watch football like we've always done? Like we haven't learned more about how this impacts Indigenous communities and how they might be celebrating or not. I've even heard that day being called a day of mourning for some folks within those communities. And so I guess not to say that I have any answers yet, we didn't really come to like a definite, here's what we're going to do and how we're going to have those conversations. But, I was just even thinking like, it's an opportunity for us to share a little bit about what we're learning in those times when we're gathering with family too. And so, I don't know, just acknowledging the like complexity of all of it, like not hardly ever in my entire life spending time thinking about Indigenous Heritage Month. But like all of that, like my whole life has been centered around Thanksgiving and thankfulness and gratitude and, these lovely things and concepts, right? Like it is a time, I think, for us to focus on gratitude. But how do we do that in a way where we're not leaving out like the reality of this country that we live in and how it started and how it continues to impact Indigenous folks in really awful ways.
I just appreciate the awareness that you're bringing to us, because it is like just like the awareness of giving thanks. It's like, what are we really like giving thanks to on Thanksgiving? Because I've like, even when you think about it in general, like you kind of like you get little drops of it when you're a kid and when you're in school, but you don't really like become aware of like what people actually went through in terms of what we now call holidays. And sometimes I'll be feeling sick. And I'm not gonna lie, when you were speaking, I was feeling sick personally, to my stomach personally, because I was like, damn, I just been like choosing to be unaware of like the true meaning of certain things and how people actually feel, and just been like chalking it up to, hey, turkey and mashed potatoes and shit. So like, I think we become really, really like just dissociated and I think maybe that helps us, right? Not become aware. Like it helps us by turning on that football game, cooking that turkey and like eating mashed potatoes to like kind of be unaware of like the real, for lack like a better terms, like just like fucked upness when you think about the history of Thanksgiving in general. So I think like what you did was just help us bring that awareness, because that's definitely where we can start, is that awareness of like, okay, we're still celebrating this that's like not even seem like the same in most people's eyes. Like, so just having that conversation about what does Thanksgiving actually mean to you? Like, what does it mean to other people? I think honestly, I'm just like mentally vomiting right now. Because that's what hit me, is once you like started to talk about the awareness, I'm like, that was really beautiful. How you just like gracefully pan that out. Because I'm like, yeah, for 26 years for sure, I was just like chucking up the deuces to Thanksgiving and just like doing the damn thing. And like it takes to hear like, no, it's not necessarily like super positive in its true nature or form. And especially when you're thinking about community and true nature, like a lot of things, when you talk about a lot of holidays, they're not spoken in truth. It's like they're kind of spoken in like in a way that we feel better about it. Like I don't want to, it's not shame either, but it's like the opposite of that. It's like we're spoken in a way where like we just don't give a fuck about where it came from, or we're just like happy. So those are just like my thoughts. Like when I think about like National American like Indian Heritage Month and how it's even on like the month of Thanksgiving, like is that like fucked up, right? Like it's like when I think about that, like it seems, because I'm not Indigenous, but it seems like even a slap in the face to have like Heritage Month be on the same month as Thanksgiving. Or maybe it leads you to actually have that conversation. So maybe it's a flip of a coin, because it kind of forces you to actually have that conversation about just what it means. But I definitely agree with the being more thankful part. But yeah, I definitely get confused too of like what what to be it. What is when I discover the true tradition and the true nature and the true history of what went on, I'm like, what the fuck am I thankful for? Specifically on that date, like what? So I don't think I really like provided much just now, more than like being grateful of you bringing that awareness for sure. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Serrano and Sean. For me, shame, sadness when I think about it. The more I know, the hardest for me to understand us as community, why we don't bring this type of, topics on the table, especially in Thanksgiving. Me growing up in Puerto Rico, that's probably considered a colony of the U.S. While we were teaching schools, they hide all that and show us how as community, how individualistic and how we hide things that we don't want other people to know, that maybe bring shame, and they just try to put it under the table and not take in consideration all these communities that are being harmed with that. And instead of create more awareness. And me being from Puerto Rico, just recently they just built this big statue of Christopher Columbus, supposed to be even bigger than the Statue of Liberty. And when we think about the natives from Puerto Rico, the Taínos, it's a community is pretty much non-existent. There's no natives and Taínos in Puerto Rico. There's only a few that they can claim, and for us as Latinos, we try to embrace that. We try to celebrate with with drums, with the rhythms, and some of the language from the Taínos in Puerto Rico. But at the same time, it's like, why we still hiding that? Why we don't? What we need to do in order to be sure this doesn't happen again, or continue happen, because these communities of power or people of power, they could continue doing the same things. We're solving everything with war, trying to show power and control, to show dominance, and we're doing it the wrong way. I think we're communities of love, we're communities that we care for each other, and we need to create awareness of our land, the land that we are. I'm now in the Dakota land, and when we're celebrating Thanksgiving, just have this type of conversations and try to change, that celebration, even in our own homes, because that's the only thing we can control. I can control what you guys do, but I can control what my loved ones do, and try to make something different, just to be sure the newer generations have a better understanding and don't commit the same mistake that we're making. So yeah.
I guess I also want to just like lift up like what you said, Felix, there, that you're on Dakota land down in that Twin Cities area, right? And I think up north here, we're on Anishinaabe or Ojibwe land. So just wanted to throw that out there. And there's something about that too, that we, Pheng, it makes me think like how, yeah, we haven't really ever done or brought in land acknowledgements in these conversations. And also that it makes me think of friends who have shared with me who are Indigenous, who are like, it's sort of just becoming this thing that people slap on the front of their training and call it good. And it's like, yeah, but what does it actually mean for us to be allies, or to, show up in solidarity, or like whatever the words, right, that we use? But like, I don't know. I can't help but think that Native folks around us are like, who cares that you're saying you're on Anishinaabe land if you're not actually showing up for the Native folks here in your town? Like, do people know where a Native organization is in your town? Like, that might be something for folks to just sort of start familiarizing yourself with, like, what is the culture, and or where is that culture found in your town, and how can we come alongside and like build relationships there. I mean, I think you named it, Pheng, that not having a Native Indigenous person here on before, and yeah, it just sort of opens my eyes in another way of like, yeah, how am I doing that? Sort of like a self-reflection thing, right? Like I'm saying the words, and am I actually like following that up with actions too?
So I'm completely conflicted, I think. Um, and this is why I'm conflicted. Maybe conflicted isn't the right word. So I'm thinking about kind of all this in terms of like land acknowledgements and stuff. And then one of the things that I sort of never mentioned is that like my father was half Cherokee, which would make me a quarter Cherokee, and and so I'm like I'm conflicted because the role models as men I look at, right, have always been Black men. That's not always true, right? You look at men, right, and then you begin to subset sort of things, just because you're socialized in part that way. And one thing I think I never, this is a point of my confliction as I think about this month is I'm recognizing that I don't know that I have looked at I don't know that I've studied sort of the role of masculinity, if you will, in any Indigenous community. And I wonder how, if I were to say, okay, well, I'm a big one for sort of trying to personalize things. Well, let me, begin to sort of excavate, right, branches of Cherokee people in terms of sort of the masculine. I'm wondering what like that would bring to me, if it would add something. I imagine it would add something, or it might just, be, it might just be nothing. The other thing I'm wondering is when I think about sort of being on land, I think that it's would be really interesting to both acknowledge it and have to do and then to do a little bit of research about it, because I think that when you start sort of uncovering sort of what was here before, I in my mind anyway, I would get this sort of different appreciation for not only who the land may have been occupied with, but that whole sort of history of that, how it went from one hand to another, right? Because we know it's in different hands now, right? And we know it was in different hands before, but something about that journey of figuring out sort of all the kind of the things that happened to bring that get shortcutted, because we're like, oh, we know somehow it just wasn't fair or wasn't just, right? And that's kind of the thing we take away, as opposed to kind of how that happened. Because I think when you think about how it happened, if you're going to sort of guard against it happening again or perpetuating it, it helps to understand kind of how it happened. So I don't know, for what it's worth, I'm conflicted. I'll remain conflicted, I guess, until I do something about it. But boy, this month is bringing up a lot of stuff now that you guys are poking it.
I think what you shared there, Roderic, in terms of like remaining conflicted about it until you do something about it. I think that is that's sparking me to really think out loud and share out loud here in this moment of like, I think, and I believe, I know that I do it sometimes too, is like, how do you move, right, in moments like that? And you want to move in ways where it's intentional, and it doesn't impact a lot of folks, because you're a masculine and male identified person, and you can cause harm along the way. And then I get stuck there, and then I just sit in that stuckness, and then I just don't do anything about it, and then I just say, I know I have to do something about it, and then I just do acknowledgement, to Sean's point there, only of like the acknowledgement only, and then that's not enough, right? Going back to our conversation about like what will be enough, you know, and like I know that that's not going to be enough, and I know that I have to do a lot more work. So it just brings up in generality for me about like in these in the totality, maybe quote unquote, of what we're all talking about, and in the struggles and doing gratitude and attention of the holidays that is happening simultaneous to celebrating and honoring Indigenous folks, that there is something there, right? That's unsettling, and that there is something there that is also grateful or joyful as well. That's mixed in it as well. And in moving in that tension or moving in that contradiction, how do I pull myself through that besides just acknowledging, right? And I think that having these kinds of conversations, for me at least, allows me to actually find ways to navigate that and find ways to actually move from that stuckness as well into more action. Because I think exactly to Sean's point there is that we need people to actually take action, right? We don't need people to be processing or just saying yes to this or yes to that. And especially when it comes to working across communities and working in different communities, right? And I think that sometimes we think that just those kinds of acknowledgements are good enough, or that if we have one or two friends, you know, the classic cliche of having one or two friends from that community is enough already, or that we are centering those folks and this is how we're doing it. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and he was talking about how they're doing a potluck or whatnot, and some of the white women are saying, just bring this dessert and egg rolls only. And it's like, is that all that Hmong people are known for, is just that? And because you can't taste other food, or you don't want to try any other food, those are the only two food that are safe to try too, you know, as well. And so I think about those things, and I think about that in terms of this conversation. Yeah, no, so that's like what's coming up for me at this moment. I don't think that I have really sounded thoughts on it, or come to some decision or conclusion on it. But I'm appreciative of all of you pushing me further in my thinking and my thoughts.
Thank y'all for sharing. And this is, I think, a comment on what Roderic was saying. I like the conflict. Not I like you being in conflict and having to deal with that. That's not what I meant. Not the head exploding, but I think like I appreciate the question, right? Because I think sometimes like when we think about it, like just emotionally, it's easy for us to put that to bed or to put it to sleep. Because we're just like, oh, that's what happened, and like I can emotionally feel that. Like, but what I was hearing was like exactly what Pheng said was like, now we have to form like a point of a point of action, right? Because when you think about it, like it's easy to think about it emotionally, but when you think about it logically, like, no, what the fuck actually happened? Like, read through it, look through the actual lines, like what actually went down, like how did it go from one to the other? Like it didn't just get handed over, like it wasn't a baton type of thing. Like it was like, you know, a act of like real like massacre and like distrust and a whole plethora of things. So I actually like, damn, maybe I'm just echoing what Pheng said, because I got revved up too by that question. Like, but it was a good revved up of like, well, yeah, like if you want to stop anything from happening, like you have to figure out like how it happened before, even though you're emotional that it did happen, and even though your heart is out there for what actually happened, like it is also beneficial to think about logically how that happened to stop it from happening again. Like that's just like a basic preventative at that point. So I think like maybe that's what comes to mind is like the point of, I think it was just good. Like the question was dope. Because it definitely got me to the point of like, okay, yeah, like that's like a step further. Like it's like it's literally like, all right, we're at the first step of knowing what happened, but the second step is the reality now, like not emotionally, but reality logically of what happened, like stepwise, sadly, strategy, like one move, one move forwards, two steps back type of an actual like logical thing. And I think sometimes we forget about that, like as a system or as like a way of like counteracting things. And it can be used like to look at something logically and be like, well, how, like what actually went down. Because I do think, yeah, when you just think about it emotionally and like have like a day where people just celebrate it and we go back to like regular lives, it's really like hurtful. But when we actually sit down and have a conversation about no, what actually like, what actually, went down, I think you could develop more actual pieces of action. Um, so maybe that's also a way that it's meant to be, right? It's meant for us to just take it emotionally, and to just hug or say I love you to the first Native person we see on the street, and not to take away from the actual like systematic. And I think about chess and checkers, like the actual like sad chess and the actual pieces that were played, like the actual people who were pawns and the sacrifices that they didn't even know they were making, but making, right? So I would say I endured that question a lot, and it's definitely starting to get my mind like revving too. So I appreciate that, and as well as just like the appreciation in general. Like I don't think I was like super like loud about that. Like my appreciation for Native Americans in general just goes like a long way. When I think about me personally, um, in my experiences of not knowing the actual history, not knowing the actual um stories of what went down, but also being actually like really like loved in, because I like went to Fond du Lac, and that was not saying that to say that that's like the end card, that's like kind of weird, but um in the time that I went there, like I was really looking for a place, like for a place of like love, for a place of understanding. I think I was literally like 19 when I went to Fond du Lac at the time. So um just learning the history and learning the places where I was actually like just brought in, even not knowing, like being probably forms of racism at the time, and um being forms of like just prejudgmental in general, but also being like kind of brought in, no matter what. So I don't think I personally took the time to think about my appreciation of the people in general. So thank you for that too.
You got me going a couple different ways now in my brain, but holy moly. I don't know, something about what you were sharing there, Serrano, like brought up a memory, or maybe a handful of memories, of like for me when it was like the first few times that I personally like went into ACO, which is here in Duluth. It's like the only cultural center in the area for Indigenous folks. And they do tons of amazing things, art shows and music and community gatherings. And I remember being invited to those first events that I showed up to and feeling really scared, really intimidated, really like unsure of like how I even come into that space, right? Because, in my own experience growing up, most of my friends and the people I were around were white people, so I'm just like completely, kind of terrified of messing something up or coming in and being in the way or, something. And I just remember all these Indigenous women primarily who, were kind of going around the room, and there was like a round dance happening where everyone was invited to join in that dance. And I just sort of remember like feeling physically ill and scared to do that, and yet being literally like pulled in to the dance and being invited in and welcomed in. And so my brain was just kind of going there, thinking about like that feeling, maybe for anyone watching, or even for myself, like when we go into, or when we try to like sort of make those efforts to like learn and to grow and connect more with different communities, right? It feels scary, and it feels like, I don't know, at least in my experience, I feel very out of place. And then it's like when I can sort of like let that that go and sort of just be in that space, be with those folks, it's like such a beautiful gift, right? To be in those spaces and to even be invited into those spaces. So that was sort of like one of the things that I was thinking about, and just sort of reminiscing and laughing that I was just so scared to go into those places. And I don't know what that is that like causes that fear in me. So it's something that I want to sort of like reflect on too. Because I think about growing up, and like my parents didn't teach me to like hate Indigenous people or to hate Black people. Like we didn't talk about those things. And yet somehow I have sort of like experienced these negative feelings being around these folks who I haven't been around, so it's like these preconceived, like stereotype shit things that get stuck in our brains through, I think, a lot of different ways, right? Media, family, like the neighborhood we live in and who we're seeing driving by or walking by. So I guess I'm, just kind of thinking about that. And it also leads me to sort of the next thing I was thinking about is like the conversation of like going from awareness, right? Like we learned the history of Thanksgiving. We learned that November is Indigenous Heritage Month. And then how do we practice that? And I was just thinking about like my sort of circles of influence, it's like there is a lot of power when one of us can actually like make that change or like learn and then really step into that. Because I think like I have a ton of people that I influence in some way or another. And if I can invite those folks in to like come in and celebrate Thanksgiving in this way where we actually have real conversations about the history, where we have conversations like this, where we're like, we don't know exactly the right thing to do or say. But, like thinking about my tiny little human who just turned 3 recently, and like thinking about the possibility of her being able to grow up where her parents are actually making an effort to expose her and to bring her into other communities, right? Like what would that be like 20 years from now when she's 23 and all her peers who hopefully have also sort of been learning and growing and like being introduced to different groups of folks and ways of being. And it just makes me think of like friends who have shared with me when they've showed up at, Trans Day of Remembrance events in the past, and it's like their first time showing up and they're surrounded by trans and non-binary people, and that fear of like, what do I better just stay quiet so I don't offend someone or like do the thing that causes harm. But it really is about like stepping into those places when we're invited. And it just makes, I don't know, it makes me feel hopeful too, because like as we're sort of making these shifts that we have this control around like our lives, what we watch on TV, what our kids are watching with us, like Reservation Dogs, or like all these things, right? Where we can be really bringing a whole lot more to our families and friends if we have the courage to do that, right? To like ask the question while we're sitting there eating turkey or and oftentimes I don't have that courage, to be real honest, so I feel like these conversations like help build that up though a little bit more. Like I feel a little bit more capable of having a conversation with people that I love who may not know anything about the real history of Thanksgiving or around this month.
I like it that people confuse courage and curiosity. And I want all of us to do it more. I want myself to do it more, right? Because I think that thinking about what you said and sort of the fear, right? I kind of think that for me, when I'm fearful, I'm sort of automatically less curious, right? And when I'm curious, I'm sort of automatically less fearful. And so as you were talking about sort of being fearful, I was trying to think about times when I've been like, what the heck? And it usually is when I've been, when I've turned off my curiosity, you know? So there you go. And there you go.
You know, and I know Felix is trying to get in so he could share here because his audio is not too good. So we'll hear from him as he moves. So we're moving in real time, obviously. But I think for me, you know, what's coming out as Sean, you were sharing was obviously a couple of things. And I think that it's so, like, I think this is why it's so important for us to actually like create communities and create connections and community and create like a sense of belonging for people in the community and a sense of a way in which people can actually contribute and feel meaningful in their contribution. Like the basic of like being seen and heard and felt. That people can be seen as whole beings, that people can be felt as meaningful beings, and can be appreciated for the contributions and the values that they actually bring. So putting that like aside, we're not there, right? I think as much as we want to be there and we want to practice and we want to say that this is where we are as a society, I think we're not there because exactly of what you're sharing is that none of us, and we know this to be so true, is none of us are raised, quote unquote, to be like racist or to be sexist or to be hating Black folks or to be hating Indigenous folks or whatever the case may be, right? And yet, to your point exactly, we somehow get to this place in our lives where we build these assumptions that become values, that become beliefs about these groups of people, right? I knew and I know, like I always talk about, is that when we do domestic violence programming for men, it's not so much about like telling them, as I've shared before, that they need to don't hate women. They haven't been raised to hate women. Like, I don't think, you know, I would say a majority, I don't want to say all, but I would say a majority of men and masculine folks have been raised to love women, to be kind to women, and to be kind to female identified folks. But somehow, somewhere along there, to your point, Sean, through society, through media, through remarks, through the conditions and the environment, men such as myself learn to actually like hate women and female identified people and be sexist in our hatred of women and girls. And so I think you're naming to me that just like really like, I just wanted to peel that open and really say that even in the way when we want to move intentionally and be moving in action and whatnot, and the ways in which we don't do certain things or act on certain things is not because we're not, it's not coming from a place of like shame or guilt about us not being good people, but it's really about like understanding like the conditions that allowed us to get to that place. And I know for one, for me, for one of the things that I've struggled with often that I don't talk about, and I think I've shared it in the space here and there, is that I struggle with Indigenous men. And part of that struggle is because of what happened and my experiences with Indigenous, with one Indigenous man, right? And so that, like, that I haven't, like, to Roderic's point earlier, like, I haven't, like, resolved that, you know, or learned how to live with that. And I know that it's so important and so vital in this work and the network here too, and the work in which we all do in some ways, and the work with men and masculine folks, is that it's so important to build cross-culturally with Indigenous men and masculine folks as well too. And yet somehow that hasn't risen, you know, in the rawness of me sharing here, that hasn't risen to like a priority, like a priority that's like actionable to me. Not that it's not a priority, but it's a priority that I'm acting on, to Serrano's point there, right? And I think that I think and I believe that that's where it's coming from for me, is because of that experience that didn't leave a good mark in my heart, and didn't and like was so profound and so impactful in my life that I haven't, because it was very traumatizing, that it had left a mark of like, I think I haven't done much work on it, you know, and I think that I don't share and I don't talk about it enough to be able to actually do it. And I think that that's part of like survivors and victims who experience violence. And I think you all know this in some ways, is like, we have to do our work in some ways, right? And then in some ways, some of us don't do our work around it, like me, I would say, or move very small ways on it too, because everybody does that healing work in different ways too. And so I'm just naming like these things that are bubbling and that are like pushing at each other and like are grinding against each other. And how am I, as a masculine person who's practicing healthiness for myself and community, moving with that, right? And I think it often, to me, it often comes up. And so I don't think that for me, it comes from the place of not seeing and invisibilizing Indigenous folks, but it really comes from that one experience. And yeah, and so I think that in really building community and thinking about how we can build communities, it means we have to do those kinds of struggles internally with ourselves, and have places and spaces where we can actually be sharing these things with people and with folks, to just hold and to just witness, right? Because even in that, I believe in giving us some grace, not excusing, but in giving us some grace to move from our places of guilt and shame to say, hey, that's action, because that struggle is good, right? That struggle in struggling through that, and it's that struggle, I think that we should appreciate and give grace to that struggle, because none of us are going to get it right, and none of us are going to get it the perfect outcome. And I don't think that us policing each other on how to do building community and connecting with each other is actually the right move, right? Because we do enough policing of one another around gender and around our expressions and around how we need to do things right. And yet I believe that there are ways to do things, and yet being graceful and humble about the acknowledgement that people are struggling through those things is important as well too. A struggle with urgency, I want to say, a struggle with urgency is important, not a struggle with like, oh, every day I'm just gonna struggle, you know, and then nothing gets done, but a struggle with some urgency so that something actually gets done.
Hey, Felix, you've been trying to talk.
Sorry, I lost audio, and I've been struggling with hearing some parts of the conversations, and other I've been missing a lot of it, so I'm a little bit gone. But listen, from the part that I was able to listen, man, we struggle with we're struggling with a lot of things, and I think our responsibility also to start having these conversations and opening up a little bit, because we're so scared about talking about certain topics because we're scared of hurting other ones, when in the reality, yeah, we need to be careful. I understand that, but starting to open spaces maybe like this one to have this type of conversation, just to normalize and start understanding that we're not perfect, we're not responsible for what was done in the past, but we're responsible for what's going on in the future. And it's our responsibility to make that change. And sometimes we're too tough on each other, but at the same time, we need to be responsible. And when I see the newer generations that seen us struggling right now, us adults in this type of conversation, just imagine them in the future. At least now they're more access to technology, the internet, so they can read and educate themselves. But in the same way, we need to do it ourselves too. But yeah, I think it's our time to make that change, to open these spaces, just have this type of conversations that maybe we never had with our parents in the past, and do it from our hearts. I struggle all the time, even when I'm talking to women, because I'm scared, or if I'm gonna say something, gonna be taken wrong, or just because from my privilege I didn't realize that I was causing harm to someone. So yeah, I think it's hard. I'm not gonna lie to you, and I struggle as a man with that, and I'm struggle sometimes. I'm trying to teach my daughters that my experiences, but understanding that my daughters have different experiences too. So how we can create a balance so they can be better than me, that have more opportunities, that they have more knowledge than me. And that's something that we, in culture-wise, we always learn things from our parents, from our grandparents, from dishes, from storytelling, everything. And that's part of our culture, something that I bring, but I also want to be sure my daughters, create their own life. They have a better understanding. But I think with our help, we're the help of our communities working together, we can be sure that the things that hurt us in the past, they're not gonna continue. So yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, I would look at the different sort of ethnic papers, if you will, and I was always struck by. I think I said this before here, that I was struck by, whereas the other papers always seem to have something about sort of culture in them, pages and pages. The pages from indigenous groups, the papers that I saw, had pages and pages of cases and sort of what was happening with all these cases, right? They're sort of moving through the system. For the longest time, I was like, I didn't understand what they were. I was like, they're doing a lot of suing here. And I think it went to, it as I learned about it, it helps me think about sort of where I might move and where I can be supportive, because if the fight is in the courts, right, then perhaps that's where I'm, needed. Maybe that's where I help, if you will. Or if it's thinking about sort of how that same system that was robbing folks of land, right, is the basis for the system that gentrifies neighborhoods, right, and justifies it. So I think there's kind of this link. So I think it's interesting. You can really, it's not so far away, right? It really is sort of part and parcel. And the last thing I'll share about this is I was working on this thing recently, and this guy mentioned that it was a fundraiser, and this big time fundraiser came in, and he said, I want you guys to realize that if you want to change that thing that we want to change, you might change your entire event. And so I'm thinking about how we might utterly change our tolerance for things when we begin sort of actually taking some steps and unpacking it. And that is going to be amazing to see how much it hurts you to think, oh crap, I used to do that just out of hand, and now when I do it, I have pangs of guilt, if you will. So it's going to be fun, I think. I hope.
Yeah, definitely the hope is that fun comes with it. But you're absolutely right, because I even think about, because I grew, like, I'm 26 now, so that means I grew up like before the computers, like old desktop dinosaurs, and now we into iPhones where they can test where you at by any location and shit. But now, like, me saying that is because I can actually see, I can see today memories of me being 16, because I had a Facebook since like 2000, like 11, 10, when I was like 15 or 16 at the time, 14 or whatever. And some of the shit, Roderic, I'm like, there's no way that was me. I'm like, there ain't no way. I'm like, there ain't no fucking way. But I'm like, no, I can't disassociate that, because it means that I've grown. I've definitely learned. Like, a lot of it is very painful, like crazy. I'm just like, there's no way. I was bad, man. But you know that you are who you are. You know, and it takes a lot to grow. So, I was thinking like the word was comfortable until Felix started speaking. I think it was scared, right? Because sometimes we get scared too. It's like, but I think comfortable is a feeling of the other side of it, right? So if I'm with a group of friends, like, and they're talking about just some bullshit, right? So the 19-year-old, 20 bullshit is like talk about women and going like, you know, the whole like just derogatory terms of that, like, you know, it's easy for men, like it is easy and more comfortable for men to just sit there and actually and just like kind of not say much, right? Like when we think about it, we don't think that it's easy with just like, but it's like we lack that. Sometimes we lack that inner discipline to be like, nah, fuck that. Like I got to do that regardless, because that's what I had to gain. Like, because now I see myself in both rooms, like, because the tolerance, right? Like the tolerance is lower and lower, because I'm like, nah, man, I don't see life like that no more. Like, I don't believe that. Like, I can't agree with that shit, so I can't be around that. Like, you could have what you have, but I'm cool on that. But before that, it was like nothing but comfortability, right? It's like you're being too comfortable before you check your friend and be like, you know, hey, this is like, you thinking it's like gonna break the world, but it's actually gonna break a mentality that's been hurting the world. Like, um, so I thought it was like comfortability, but I think it's also being scared, because like it's tough to be in a room in Thanksgiving and bring up the question and be like, you know what, do y'all really actually know this shit? Everybody call you the, you know, the whole Zen, bullshit like, oh, now he's woke and he's this and he's Zen. But in all reality, like that's hard to take in, but it's very true though. It's very like stern though. And I think that's what it is. It's like we're scared to jump. It's like that line is like hard as hell. Don't get me wrong. The line is high, but once you jump over that line, like it's a softer landing, because you're at least now you're now within your beliefs, right? Like at least now you're actually living within your beliefs. Like most of us and myself too. Like I just talk about the beliefs, like, but when you're living in your beliefs, it's a complete different thing. Because yeah, this that last part you said about just like looking back at how you just like used to be. Was very like eye-opening for me. I was like, yeah, I don't even know if I would chill out with 16-year-old Serrano, let alone like, but it definitely just shows, like, it shows where you got like, wait, I would say where you stirred away, right? Because I keep going to the points of like birth and then being swamped into like the mess of like toxic masculinity and how we get into that, and it being back into a place where um you're living back into your beliefs, like kind of like childlike feeling to where you don't feel like any guilt because you're not allowing anybody to be wrong to each other. But yeah, that shit is hard. And I think sometimes like we use comfortability in life in general and being like scared in general to just like kind of do those things and kind of jump for it. So, but no, I don't want to have any conversations about 10 years ago of me. But yeah, thank you.
Well, I feel like that's a a good segue. Leave some folks wondering. No, just kidding, just kidding. I appreciate what you shared, Serrano, and yeah, I definitely have those stories too. Back in, and just I think that that is a big part of my gratitude in this time is like actually being intentional to like think about where have I come from, and where am I going, right? Like I feel like for myself, I have made a lot of change, and I have really looked at my own beliefs in a lot of ways, and yet dang, if another one doesn't come up every conversation that we have here where I'm like, I got to revisit this now. I got to think a little bit deeper about that. And then not only think about it, right, but like think about how to put that into action, how to show up in my community in a better, healthier way. You know, we need men and masculine folks to show up in those ways a lot more in our communities. So I'm just grateful for each of you, grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation and all of the nuances and complexities around it. And I think it's cool that, you know, we're in this position where we can sort of model having these conversations. And hopefully it's clear to you that we don't always have answers. Oftentimes we don't have the answers figured out, but I think just the act of gathering and asking these questions and sharing our stories and thinking about where we've come, and it's a beautiful way, I think, for all of us to grow together. So we want to just thank everybody who has been able to watch us live, or if you're watching this after the fact, we're grateful for you. We're grateful to be in community with you, and we would love to build that community deeper. So we would love for all of you to reach out to share your thoughts, share your stories about what's coming up for you as we have these conversations. You can do that here on our Facebook page. You can get in touch with us through our websites. You know, there's lots of ways. We would love to connect with you. So thanks again. This was our 30th live kitchen table conversation. Big thanks to our funding partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, as well as the Novo Foundation for all their support. And as a reminder, these conversations are happening every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So the next one will be on Thursday, November 18th at noon. So join us. We're looking forward to having another really good conversation around Transgender Awareness Month and Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is coming up on November 20th. So join us for that, where we're hoping to have a couple of guests join us to talk about what that means to them and for all of us, really. So don't forget to like our Facebook page, find us on YouTube. You can catch up on all of our previous conversations on YouTube there or here on Facebook. But again, we hope you all take good care and that you take some time, you know, this month to reflect on gratitude and how you're showing up in your families and in your communities. Thanks. Take good care.
And like Mahatma Gandhi said, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. The ball is in our court, so let's make a change. Good luck. Bye, everyone.